when we're designing for habits, there's a couple things that we're looking for. So a habit, my definition for a habit is an automatic or near automatic behavior that happens to respond to a trigger in the environment. So what's the thing that tells people now is the time to use this behavior, and how do I get people consciously or well, subconsciously responding to that trigger when they bump into it? So if we look at our partograph example, that's a really interesting one because it sounds like people aren't using it right, which means they're not interrupting the flow of, say, normal birth procedures to stop and use a partograph. And so the question is, how do we really tune people to the trigger of when should I stop and consider, do I need to use a partograph right now? And the question is that something that can just be built into the procedure. So something like APGAR scores is a case where these were all good behaviors that people were doing. And by making a checklist out of it and having a specific point where people stopped and did the checklist, you weren't relying on, did they have the habit of checking for these different characteristics? You just made it part of the procedure so that it automatically happened and they automatically would evaluate the baby for APGAR scores. And so that's one way to do it, is to make it an official procedure. Another way to do it is to tune people for when do I recognize that I should use a particular habit. One of the things that I have for my own personal use is when I look for something and I can't find it in my house, I try to, when I do eventually find it, I try to move it to the first place that I looked, because that is apparently where I think it should belong. So I have a habit of recognizing the trigger, which is, hey, I had to look 9 different places to find the spare batteries for the smoke detectors. But the first place I looked was the bin where all the other batteries are. So maybe that should be where I put so when I put this away, when I'm done with it, I want to put it with the other batteries because that's apparently the place that I'm looking. So the habit is I'm going to change the location where I store this, but the trigger is I just spent a stupid amount of time looking around for things in my house. So asking the question of what's the trigger that tells me it's time to use the habit? And is there anything that I can change about the environment? Is there anything I can do to decrease barriers or increase motivation? Is there anything I can do to have a feedback mechanism to make sure that those habits get reinforced? Another one is implementation intentions, which is setting up a little script for yourself of when X happens, I'll do Y. So if anybody's ever tried to quit smoking, you know that there's a bunch of things, which is a real hard problem, but there's a bunch of things that tend to derail people when they try to quit smoking. It might be stress, it might be boredom, it might be social opportunities where people are smoking, it might be habits like you always smoke after lunch. And so what you can do, and this is research from Peter Gollwitzer, who's done a lot on this, implementation intentions, you can write a little script in your head for how I'm going to handle those situations when I encounter them. So I don't have to decide what to do, I just need to execute on it. So if I have a craving to smoke because I'm stressed out, I'll call my sister. If I have a craving to smoke because I'm in a social situation, I'll chew gum. If I have a craving to smoke because I'm bored, I will play a video game on my phone. And so the more that I can have a little script that I write ahead of time for how I'm going to handle certain things. So if I notice that I see this particular phenomenon happening during a birth, I'm going to stop and ask myself, is it time to use a partograph, for example? And if you can tune people to looking for, and then you can practice things where they're looking for the trigger and identifying the trigger so that they can start to create an automatic association with it.